Hey you guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you're having an amazing day and thanks so much for joining me for another art video. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about why, even though I'm an artist that most often than not makes use of some sort of reference photo or something that I have in front of me in real life to base a drawing or a painting off of, I do not copy what I am seeing 100%. I mostly use these reference photos or whatever it is that I have in front of me in real life as loose inspiration or something to jump off from, and also as a source of visual information that can help me remember things I would have otherwise maybe forgotten, and that is going to provide these visual tidbits that I can decide whether to bring in or leave out depending on the amount of realism that I am going for the piece on hand. I often get questions on how I do this by beginners getting started on their journeys. And this is why I wanted to share this video with you today, sharing my personal insights in terms of what is going on in my brain, the questions that I'm asking, the things that I am thinking about as I am looking at a reference photo or a live subject so that that can translate into a nice looking artwork. So today, as I share this process for this pen and watercolor wash piece, I'm also sharing right here the photograph that I was actually looking at as I was moving along with the creation of this piece. This one I found over at unsplash.com and it was taken by photographer Lawrence Kleinhather. I'm going to be sharing some questions that I always ask myself as I'm going through the planning phase for a new piece that always help me create better looking visual compositions and also help me ensure that there's going to be a lot of myself in them. I think that that is the point of creating art in the first place, right? Creating original pieces that have yourself in them, that people find interesting and visually pleasing to the point that they want to keep looking, and that communicate a mood, message, or story that you're looking to communicate. And this all comes down to making artistic choices and not just taking a photograph or whatever it is that you have in front of you in real life and painstakingly trying to copy everything 100% as is. And this all comes down to making deliberate artistic choices and not just taking that reference photo or even whatever it is that you have in front of you in real life. Oftentimes, even if you took that photo yourself, or even if you created that still life arrangement on your own, or whatever it is, in those cases, though, you do have more control. But even in those cases in which you do have more control over your subject, you still have to bring in your critical thinking skills and make certain artistic choices. It's not just about copying everything that you see as is. It's about bringing in our knowledge of art fundamentals and composition, how to add depth to a piece, how to create an aesthetically pleasing, visually balanced, harmonious looking composition that is able to communicate a mood, message, idea, or story. And then also making those decisions and choices in terms of what we're leaving out, what we're bringing in, what specific techniques we're going to be using to bring more of ourselves into the piece, how we're going to be creating a visual hierarchy and pulling the viewer's attention towards the focal point, etc. All right, so before getting into the tips and the questions that I would recommend asking yourself while you're looking at that reference photo or what it is that you have in front of you in real life as you're preparing for a new drawing or painting, or even as you're moving along in your drawing or painting process, I just want to very quickly make it clear that there are certain situations in which it is very, very helpful to push yourself to do the rendering of whatever it is that you're looking at as closely and precisely and accurately as possible. For example, whenever it is that I am working on a study to keep my observational skills sharp, or with the specific objective of increasing the level of realism and detail in the way that I draw hair or the way that I paint eyes or something specific like that, then I would see that as a specific study that I am maybe working on in my sketchbook or a smaller painting or something like that. But what I'm talking more about today are full compositions, right? That we're going to be spending a greater amount of time on, original compositions that we're going to be sharing or maybe even selling or creating for somebody else. And even in cases in which, for example, someone is commissioning you to draw or paint their portrait in full likeness and as realistic as possible, There are still artistic choices to be made in terms of, for example, the background color. Quite often, the client or the customer is going to give you a photo that has lots of background elements to it, and you're going to have to decide what to take out, what to leave in, to remove the background completely. And even in certain cases, when it comes to portraits, in which there's just one single subject in the piece, if you do some research on very, very famous, super amazing portraits out there created by artists throughout history, you're going to find that they made lots of choices along the way. Oftentimes, you're going to find that greater contrast or more detail or sharpness is added into the eyes, and everything else is left slightly more blurred out or less detailed, and this helps pull the viewer's attention right to the eyes. It makes the eyes very kind of piercing. When it comes to doing studies for your own artistic development or something that you want to improve on, oftentimes there is little to no prep work involved, but when you're going to be working on a larger piece, there is more thought to go into composition, thumbnailing, thinking of colors, things you want to alter, techniques you want to use, etc. Maybe even studies and practicing of techniques that you need to do before jumping into the final piece, all that kind of stuff. It kind of increases the prep time for that kind of larger piece. As we continue moving forward in our journey, both kinds of pieces, both little studies, explorations, even play work, and larger pieces that we spend more time on, both are important in our development. And before moving into the tips and the questions, I also wanted to very quickly share these 3 amazing pieces with you. This first painting is a beautiful piece created by American artist Norman Rockwell in 1957. To the left, you can see the reference photo that he used, and on the right, you can see his final piece. And I just want you to notice all of the differences between the two. He took things out, he brought things in this case, an entire person to the left of the girl. He altered certain things, increased the expression in people's faces, made use of his own color scheme, and all of this to improve the composition, to make it more interesting, and to transmit the message that he was trying to transmit. The second piece was created by Czech artist Alfons Mucha in 1900. The reference photo is on the left, the final piece is on the right, and even though things are very, very different, you can probably get an idea of how helpful it was for the artist to have that woman posing in the way that he wanted the figure to be in his final piece. And even though the pose is slightly different, it was still very, very helpful for him to look at that, to have that as a foundation. And finally, here's a piece by French artist Toulouse-Lautrec that he created in 1891. The reference photo is on the left, the final piece is on the right, and you can see how much the artist changed, what he altered, what he brought in, how he brought in his own color scheme to really communicate that mood and that story that he was trying to communicate. And you'll find tons of examples of artists like this throughout history that made use of reference photos out of practicality. But of course, there are also artists who work in plein air, who are actually on site right there experiencing the scene firsthand. And also in those cases, they have to simplify. They have to make sure that they're selecting a focal point. Decisions are made. And professional artists who actually have a photography setup with lamps and everything like that in their studios, they make lots of these decisions beforehand, before taking those photos, right? But even in these cases, cropping is something that can greatly affect the composition. And what specific techniques are they going to be using to create that depth and that interest they're trying to create? There are still choices to be made. Same exact thing goes for artists who are working from direct observation from life and who actually have their model or their subject right in front of them. They have to choose what is going to be inside of the frame, what is going to be left out, how they're going to be making use of all of these different techniques to call the viewer's attention to the focal point, to create depth, etc. All right, so with all that out of the way, I am now going to go ahead and share my top 8 questions. And these are things that I always ask myself or make sure to think about whenever I am planning to start a new piece. And this goes for whether I come across an awesome reference photo that I can use, that I am looking to use as loose inspiration for a piece, whether I take my own reference photos that I'm going to be working from, or whether I have something in front of me in real life that I'm going to be drawing or painting from direct observation. And again, these questions are going to help you create better looking pieces, interesting looking pieces that are balanced, harmonious, that have yourself in them, and that also transmit the mood, message, story, or idea or emotion that you're looking to transmit. Question number 1 that I always ask myself when I find a photo or I have something that I want to create a drawing or a painting off from is, what do I like about what I am looking at, and what don't I like about what I am looking at? If you come across a photograph that you really love and it really inspires you to create a drawing or a painting, ask yourself specifically what it is that you like about that photo. There's something that attracted you to that photo. Make sure that you pinpoint what it is so that you can make sure to actually keep that and even enhance it in your drawing or painting, or sometimes even make it the focal point depending on what it is. And also take note of the things that you don't like very much about that reference photo. Be specific once again, so that you can then decide whether you're going to be taking that out or altering it in some way. For example, what attracted me to this particular photo that I am working with today was that bright red door surrounded by neutrals and blacks. I really loved the brick wall. I thought it would be a great opportunity for me to practice painting and rendering bricks in a loose way. I really love the idea of integrating handwritten lettering in this piece for those signs. I love that glow coming from the lamp. And when it came to the things that I don't like about this photo, I think there is a lot of empty wall space at the top. And so I made that lamp a little bit smaller. I brought it down to integrate things together a little bit more, give more space to the door, which I wanted to make the focal point. And I played with the cropping so that not as much empty wall space was left at the top. I also thought that the cropping at the bottom was a little bit awkward. I needed a little bit more space at least beneath that step. There are also little electricity boxes and cables and little pipes and things like that on the wall that I decided to take out as well because I didn't think they were adding anything to the composition. Moving on to question number 2, and this is, what do you want to make the focal point in your piece, and what are secondary elements and supportive elements? You always want to make sure that you have some focal point or points present that you want to call the viewer's attention towards. In this case, for example, I wanted the focal point to be the red door, so I made it a bit wider. I made sure that it was taking up enough space in my piece. And I also made that lamp smaller so that it wouldn't compete with the red door. You want to make sure after you've selected your focal point that there is nothing competing with it, and that the other elements are actually supporting it. Everything is working together as a whole to communicate the same message. Moving on to question number 3, and this is there too much negative space or too little negative space present in this photo? Having a play and a balance between positive or active areas and negative or inactive areas in a visual composition is important. The viewer's eyes need a place to rest. Otherwise, the drawing or painting can be very overwhelming to look at or even confusing to look at. But if there's too much negative space, the focal point or main element in the piece or elements in the piece can look like they are floating in nothingness. They can get lost in the vast sea of space around them. Sometimes we really need to give thought to whether we want to zoom in or simply play with the cropping so that not as much negative space is left. But having too little negative space or having a certain important section of the subject cropped out in an awkward way can also be an issue because things can look too cramped. There has to be a balance between positive and negative areas. When I am working on a longer piece and I am working with a reference photo, I always open up that reference photo in Photoshop and prepare that photo in exactly the same size of the substrate that I'm going to be working on, so that I know that the image that I am seeing off my computer screen has the exact same dimensions or proportions as the substrate that I am working on. And I always take time to zoom in, zoom out, modify the cropping, move the photo to the left or to the right, play with the positioning of it until I arrive at something that I like. Sometimes I like bringing in the rule of thirds if I am working on a landscape or some sort of scene, because the rule of thirds always helps me arrive at a nice balance between positive and negative spaces and helps create an asymmetrical balance that is interesting to look at. I also like making sure that the format that I've selected for my final piece really goes hand in hand with the composition on hand, whether it's vertical, horizontal, rectangular, squared, or whatever it is. The format of the piece also has to do with composition, and it can work to enhance the piece, and it can also take away from the piece. Moving on to question number 4, and this one is, are there any distracting / confusing elements that are taking away from the focal point or not adding anything to the composition? It is important to simplify unnecessary detail in order to give importance to what truly matters in the piece. Just as an example, in this piece that you're seeing me work on, I made the deliberate decision to paint in the bricks very minimally and very loosely, and I didn't go in and try to paint in every single little brick. I knew that there was no need for me to do this, and if I did this, I could have ended up with an overworked or over-described piece, when really what matters most here is the focal point, the door, the sign above it, and maybe even the lamp above that. And the bricks and everything else, they are supportive elements. So I made choices in terms of specific techniques and how much detail I would be adding into these areas in order to balance out the piece and not take away from the focal point. Moving on to question number 5, and this is there anything that I could possibly bring in that is not present in this photo that could possibly complement and work as a supportive element to communicate the message, idea, or story that I'm looking to communicate, or to add interest to the piece, or to balance out the piece a little bit more? If so, what extra resources or reference material should I look for or compile so that I can actually make that happen in my piece? There have been many cases in the past in which, for one reason or another, I make use of more than one reference photo for one same piece. Maybe I have a beautiful landscape photo and I actually want to add in some cabin or a little house into that. Or maybe I want to add in a different kind of tree from what's actually present in the photo. Sometimes I've had it happen in which I chose a beautiful reference photo for an animal painting that I am working on, but that specific reference photo, even though the pose of the animal is beautiful and I'm really inspired by it, I'm not actually able to see the animal's eyes very well, and I need to supplement that photo with other photos that do allow me to see the animal's eyes better. So there are all sorts of different situations like that in which it's very helpful to just look for extra references or resources, or even learn about what it is that you are drawing or painting from a video, a book, or whatever it is, whatever you need to better inform your work, or whatever you need to actually bring in that extra element that is going to help support the piece and make it look better. I will say though here as an extra note that if you will be combining multiple photos for a piece, things like lighting and perspective in these different elements, it has to be consistent in your piece if you're looking for any level of realism. All right, moving on to question number 6 that I like asking myself before getting started with a new piece in order to create a more effective visual composition, and this is, should I alter or manipulate colors present in the photo? So I mentioned in past videos how color is an element of art that plays a huge role in making a visual composition look harmonious and cohesive. As artists, it's so important to give thought to the color that we're going to be using for the piece on hand before getting started. If we randomly pick colors out of whim along the way, it's highly likely that at the end, it's not going to look as harmonious and cohesive as it could look. When I've found a great photo to work from, I always take note of all the different colors present, and I give thought to how I can create a simple color scheme that I can work with that is going to allow me to create all the different colors that I need. And if you've checked out any of my past painting tutorials, and you're probably already well aware that I am a huge fan of keeping the numbers that I'm using limited and also repeating my colors throughout the piece, because this is going to lead to more harmony at the end. I also give thought to how I'm going to make an interesting play with color temperature. And if there's a specific mood or message or even emotion that I'm trying to transmit, should I maybe change a certain color or make another color brighter or more intense, or mute colors out to better transmit that message or that mood? There are also artists out there that only make use of specific limited colors, and this is the way that they're bringing themselves and their own art style into the picture. Moving on to question number 7, and this one is, what level of realism am I going for the piece on hand? So chances are that if you have your art style already developed, then you already know the level of realism that you're after. But if you're getting started, maybe you're still at a point at which you're discovering your art style and that level of realism to abstraction that you personally like. And if you're in this camp in which you're a beginner, just finding your artistic style, I would highly recommend giving thought to this since the beginning and sticking to your plan along the way, because what I often see is that certain sections are highly rendered, very realistic, and others are not. And at the end, the style is very inconsistent to the point that the piece looks messy and just not completed. Doesn't matter what kind of reference it is that you're looking at, you can make something completely abstract using that reference, or you can use it to create something completely hyper-realistic and even photorealistic. And there is an infinite amount of degrees of abstraction to realism in between that. But you have to make sure that you decide what it is that you're going for the piece on hand, and then make sure that you stick to that throughout the drawing or the painting process. For this piece, for example, that I'm sharing with you today, I knew since the beginning that I wanted to create something loose, something relatively expressive and with not too much detail. And if at any point in time I were to catch myself throughout this process adding way too much detail to any area, especially when it's not the focal point, then I would stop myself from adding any more. Okay, moving on to question number 8. This is the last question that I always make sure to ask myself before getting started with a new complete piece. And this is, what specific techniques can I bring in to make this drawing or painting my own, to bring more of myself into this piece? Depending on the medium or mediums that you're using, really give thought to the specific techniques that you love, the techniques that you feel more comfortable using, that are exciting to you, that you feel will lead to the effects that you personally enjoy. Even give thought to the specific color mixtures that you love the look of, or the specific tools, paintbrushes, or pencils or pens that you like using. For example, for this piece, because I brought in both pen and ink and watercolor, I was thinking of techniques with both mediums that I could combine to create a nice looking piece that I really enjoyed and thought would look great together. If you're using pen and ink, for example, what kind of alternative shading technique or mark making techniques are you going to be using? Are you going to be using hatching, cross-hatching, scribbling, stippling, contour lines, or simply defining the outer edges? If you're using watercolor, are you going to be bringing in wet on wet, or wet on dry, or splattering, or layering? Are you going to be adding a full background, a vignette style background like I did today, or minimal background, or not at all? If you're going to be combining mediums like I did with this pen and watercolor wash piece, what percentage is going to be done with each medium so that they can balance each other out? Do you want to do more description with pen? Do you want to do more description with watercolor? How are these mediums going to complement each other? All of these are choices that you can make based on what you love. And this is the beauty of art, that nothing is right or wrong. And there is an infinite amount of ways of doing things and combining things to make things your own. And as you continue moving forward in your journey and discovering yourself artistically and learning more about art, You have more of these tools and this knowledge to bring yourself more and more into your pieces while simultaneously creating pieces that others get inspired by, that others enjoy. I hope that this video was helpful. I hope that it gave you lots of ideas to bring in for future pieces. And I really hope that I've encouraged you to give a little bit more time to planning and prep work so that your pieces can be even more amazing and more successful. I know you have it in you to create amazing looking work. Alright, you guys, that is gonna do it for today's video. I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you found it helpful. And if you did, pretty please make sure to give this video a thumbs up, because it really helps support the work that I am doing here on YouTube and helps others get to know about my channel. Thank you so much for watching today. Don't forget to subscribe and click on that little bell so that you can be notified of when I share my new videos, which happens every single week. Have a beautiful rest of the day and see you soon. Bye guys!